Chapter 15 Avenger Red. "Slavers," Cody said from the outcropping he had stretched across. He kept his body close to the rock while he gazed into the valley ahead of them. Val, Caitlin, and Haille waited behind him. "How many?" Val asked. "Slaves. At least 3 dozen, strung out on dog lines." "Guards?" 6. 7 if you count the driver. Can't tell who might be inside that wagon. Could be more slaves. Could be slavers drunk out of their heads and sleeping it off. Too many for us to help," Val said, spitting. "Scoundrels." "We're far beyond the reaches of the ley now," Cody said, crawling back down the rock. "Outlaws behind us, slavers in front of us. I'd say it's time we held a council of war," Val said. "Agreed," Cody said, planting his feet on the ground and plucking a stray blade of grass that he slipped into his mouth the way an older man might chew on a pipe when considering weighty matters. "What is there to decide?" Haille asked. "Well, whether to continue on this quest of yours or take you back to the city where you are safe," Val said. "I can't go back. You agreed to help us. We're paying you." Val laughed, nodding at the coin purse on Haille's belt. "We've long surpassed the payment that could fit into that pouch." "I'd concur," Cody added. "You're not helping us for the money," Caitlin said. She had been stroking the elk on its face, and now the animal peered over her shoulder as she spoke. It had taken a liking to her, allowing her to ride it, even letting her sleep curled up against its side when they rested. Haille was envious, for the animal was wary of him, refusing any grass he offered and slipping away when he tried to mount. "You're helping us because you are bound. You have not forsaken your vows." "That might be true, but a man has to eat, and Cody is not a member of the Order." "Speak for yourself about a man's need to eat. A man needs more than eating," Cody said. "Just what is this Order of Oban?" Haille asked. Cody looked to Val, who shifted from one foot to another, then took a deep breath, puffing out his chest. "The Order of Oban was an order of warriors unlike any other. We were devoted to life. Whose life? All life. That is the only way to secure true peace and lasting concord. We were warriors trained to fight, but only to kill when there was no alternative. Our weapon of choice is not the sword, but the yew-staff, so that we can disarm rather than kill. For us, even the life of our enemy is sacred and must be protected, unless he leaves us no other choice." "That is where they lost me," Cody said, drawing an imaginary sword from his belt. "I prefer the sword." Val glared at him before softening his expression and shrugging. "Ours is a noble sentiment, and has saved your life many a time." "As I recall, my sword has saved yours more than a few." "True." "How can you be a warrior and try to protect the life of your enemy?" Haille asked. "Well, one way is not to make enemies, but the other is through training, discipline, self-control. Most men who enter a fight do not want to die. We just make sure we win so nobody dies. We show mercy to our opponent. Truly the only thing that can untie bitter enemies is the one thing they likewise hold sacred: their lives and the lives of their loved ones. Build on that, and you can build peace." "Sounds outlandish," Cody said. "But it builds more allies than enemies, more understanding than enmity. After all, the best way to destroy an enemy is to make him a friend," Val said. "Sounds dangerous to me," Cody said, shaking his head and looking to the sky. Haille had the sense that this was a debate going on between these two men since long before. "Is it true you were disbanded for betraying the High Council of Anthor?" "You know more than you let on." Haille shrugged and jabbed a thumb in the air towards Caitlin. "She reads a lot." "It's true. We felt that the Council was in the wrong. But we lost, and to the victors go the spoils." "And the history books," Caitlin added. "I only learned of the Order when I was reading books that were officially banned." "But what were you thinking?" Haille said, astonished. "Even my father has to answer to the High Council in Caddisons. I thought they were, well, good." Cody laughed. "The coins in your purse, the fortunes of our rulers were not won by being good. They rarely are." "Careful, else you disabuse them of their youthful dreams too quickly," Val said, studying Haille's reaction. "You have not given up on yours," Caitlin said to Val. "Some days I've tried." "But he's a stubborn fool," Cody said. Val rubbed the whiskers on his jaw. Be at ease, Prince Haille, for your father is known to be a just ruler, a good man. So you don't mind helping his son? Caitlin asked. I don't mind helping anyone in need, Val said. Lucky for you, you have gold to pay me, Cody added. Val shook his head. But if we are to continue to help you, we need to know more of this mission you are on. Haille and Caitlin's eyes met. She nodded, and he started from the beginning, the very beginning as he saw it. His mother's death, his father's distance, the resentment towards Haille for her death, and for his own deficiencies. The hatred from the nobles, the ridicule of other children. He shared all. He had never even told his whole story before, discussed all the pain, or the darkest thoughts he had harbored. But he told it all in order to explain his hope, his desperate hope, that the font existed and that it could cure him. The story seemed persuasive, at least enough so that the two men did not laugh. To his surprise, Caitlin wiped tears from her eyes when he finished and reached over to clutch his hand. As she let go, he noticed Val and Cody both in deep thought. In the silence that followed, Haille reached into his breast pocket, removed the folded pages of the folio, and handed them to Val. His eyes roved over them, and when he was finished he handed them to Cody. After a quick glance, Cody returned them to Haille, asking, How do you know this is the truth, and not superstition like so much else? Some things ring truer than others, Caitlin said, her hand rubbing her upper arm. Haille had left out her story from his, and he sensed he had done right. Apparently all their secrets would not be shared in one sitting. The font is an unknown, so's the path. That means our choice is between the uncertainty of the quest versus the safety of return, Val said. Hearing it phrased so, Haille felt anxious they would have to return. No, please, this may be my only chance. I told you about the letter my father wrote. Val hummed, his fist to his lips. We've seen stranger things in our travels, Cody said. Val nodded. Caitlin patted the elk. And we've gained an ally. He fights like a beast of legend. That he does, Val said. The cautious council says we should turn back. However, those riders wait between us and the city. There is conspiracy and treachery afoot, and doing the unexpected might be what is best. We'd be safe in Rivertown, Haille said. Yonna has friends there still at River Ridge Manor. Val let out a long stream of air between his lips. Every old man yearns for safety, every young man for adventure, and every son yearns for the approval of his father above all else. If there is only one chance to set that right, I say we go east. Haille leapt off the stump and pumped his fists. Just as he did, a horn blast rent the air. Cody scrambled back up to the top of the outcropping, his feet kicking up grit. He reached the top and turned back to them. The slavers! They're under attack! As one, they followed Cody, stretched out flat on the rock next to him, and watched the drama unfold. As Cody had described, the wagon pulled by oxen was making its way through the valley, children chained together in 3 dog lines behind it. The children were not evenly spaced, but rather older ones carried younger ones who had grown too weak to march. One line was folded in a V as children at the ends dragged one child who looked to be dead. Why the slave masters had simply not unchained the body, Haille could not guess, unless it was meant as some lesson or the extra weight of punishment for the other children. The driver had pulled up on the oxen, bringing the cart to a stop while the slavers fanned out to either side. 9 riders, young riders that looked to be children themselves, approached on ponies from the north end of the valley. They carried swords and shields and beat one upon the other, raising up a clatter that echoed between the ridges. 8 more sprung from the trees in the south end of the valley, but they rode without announcing themselves. At their fore was a red-clad rider on a white pony, her blonde hair waving behind her like a war banner. By the stars above, Cody said. The slavers formed a line in front of the oxen to face the approaching riders. Off to the side of the road, the turf sprung to life as more children leapt up from the grasses, wearing cloaks of woven reeds and tree cuttings. They knocked arrows to their bows and let fly into the slavers' numbers. 2 fell, arrows sprouting from their legs. The riders from the front closed in and used the confusion and their mounts to their advantage. The riders from the south swept over the children, shattered their chains, and formed a protective circle around them. All except the Red Rider. She leapt from her mount, ran across the roof of the cart, her footsteps thudding like mallets on a great drum, and in a flash of steel drew her sword. With a single swing she took off the head of the driver. It bounced like a melon off the bench, knocking into the hindquarters of the oxen before coming to rest in a spreading puddle at the roadside. All but one of the slavers had been cut down, the children proving to be cruel victors, stabbing their enemies repeatedly after they had fallen. "He's escaping!" one called out to the girl on top of the cart. One slaver was indeed sprinting for the cover of the forest. The girl signaled to one of the children, who tossed her his quiver and bow. She knocked back an arrow and took aim. "No way she can reach him," Cody said. "Out of range," confirmed Val. But the girl released. The arrow soared in a long, curving path that seemed never to reach its apex. The slaver was sure to escape, closing as he was on the edge of the forest. Then the arrow tipped downward, and as if guided by an invisible hand, it dropped straight into place in the slaver's back. "I've never," Cody said. "That was extraordinary," Caitlin said. "That could only be one person," Haille said, getting to his feet. "Avenger Red." He stood upon the rock, silhouetting himself against the sky, but he did not care if he gave away their position now. Instead, he slipped over the edge of the outcropping, brushing up flakes of lichens and kicking up scree, all the while calling out, "Avenger Red! Scourge of slavers! Hero to the oppressed! We come as friends!" He felt as if his heart had skipped a beat. His palms were sweaty. Haille had been in the presence of kings, queens, and council elders, but none had stirred him like the sight of Avenger Red. This was coming face to face with a legend, a ghost, a real-to-life myth. How many times had he heard of her exploits on behalf of enslaved children and to the consternation of vile slavers? In a land far from the justice of the city, she was justice, in her own merciless way. She was already crossing the field to where the slaver lay dying when she picked Haille out as he lunged and stumbled down the scree slope. She placed a second arrow in her bow, but did not knock it back, although two of the children in grass cloaks did and raced out to flank her. Haille stopped on the edge of the field, just short of the slaver who had gone still, the arrow shaft sticking out just below his neck. Haille could hear Val, Cody, and Caitlin riding down the slope to catch up with him. After so many travails, luck had finally shone her beautiful face on them. "Who are you?" the girl he took to be Avenger Red asked. Closer, Haille could see she was in her teens, but even for a young woman she was small. Nothing in her dress, however, singled her out as female. She wore riding breeches, sleeveless ringmail, and a form-fitting red tunic. Haille's mind raced. It was too soon for the truth. He reached for their assumed identities. "I am Derek, of Antis. My companions and I were on our way to Rivertown. We were set upon by bandits but escaped. We've been keeping off the main road since." The two children to either side of her had hardened faces. They were haunting to look at, for they lacked the softness Haille would have expected in most children. Perhaps as killers they had completely surrendered some part of their childhood innocence. Their eyes, as they looked down their arrow shafts at him, were flat, empty, dead. "You are Avenger Red, aren't you?" Haille said, more a statement than a question. "Depends on who is doing the asking. To city dwellers I am a vigilante. Not to all. To many you are a hero," Haille said, his breath coming short. Val, Cody, and Caitlin rode up behind him. Val wore an expression that looked as if he had just swallowed sour milk. Haille imagined the knight was not pleased with his impulsiveness. Red betrayed no sense of warmth on her side either. Deep frowning lines bracketed the corners of her mouth. The skin around her eyes was crinkled, and her eyes were tight, as if she were looking into the sun. There were more lines in her face than Haille would have expected of her years, but he attributed it to the many troubles she had seen, the harsh justice she had been forced to mete out. "An unexpected lot if I ever saw one," she said, looking from Val to Cody, then lingering on Caitlin, who sat on the elk, gripping its mane in her fists. "Elk riders! This world is full of wonders." She lowered her bow, walked the length of them, coming to the last elk, and tapped its antlers with the end of her bow. It made a meadow-like tink-tink. The elk breathed in a deep breath, then huffed and hissed at Red, kicking the ground with its front hoof. "Humph," Red said, backing away. She motioned to the archers, and they relaxed their bowstrings. "Bound for Rivertown, you said?" "Yes," Haille answered, looking to the others, willing them to follow his lead. Didn't they realize they were in the presence of a legendary hero? "The Eastlands can be dangerous. We march eastward from here with our newly freed children. You're welcome to join us, once we attend to some business. She strode up to the body of the slaver, yanked out the arrow, and stabbed him through the chest to make sure he was dead. She wiped her sword on his tunic. Haille thanked her, expressing his gratitude even after she turned her back and stalked up to the wagon. The two grass-cloaked children lingered a while, studying the four of them before searching the body, removing any coins and jewelry that they found. Once they had left to follow Red, Haille turned to the others. You've heard of her, haven't you? Yes, Val said. But if you ever endanger us by giving away our position to strangers again, she's not a stranger. I knew who she was. You got lucky this time, Val said. I'd say we got lucky, Cody said. Did you see how she dropped that slaver? Don't you start acting enamored, Val said. She's a butcher. He steadied his horse as a crow landing on the dead body startled it. More of the scavengers followed. He doesn't like her, Caitlin said, patting the elk on the neck. Haille blew the hair off his forehead and smoothed it back with his hand. What do we care what an elk thinks? The business Red had to attend to was no small matter. Her comrades had broken the chain gang of children loose of the wagon. The freed children had wide eyes, either from relief or terror. Already the older ones were tending to the younger ones. All of them bore the marks of abuse, welts from whips, bruises, and the emaciated frames of the starved. They gathered in a tight knot. Red's people handed out flatbread and placed water skins among them. Cody and Val dismounted and shared some of their water with them as well. The wagon itself was still sealed. It was wood on all sides with barred windows and a door with a heavy latch on the back. Two of Red's boys peered inside and promptly ducked away. It's full of children, small ones, but Quentin Stills is in there too, one said. A master slave trader, Red said by way of explanation to Haille and the others. Shall we break him out? Val asked from the ground where he knelt next to a cowering girl. No, Red said. Pile grass and wood beneath the wagon. We'll burn him out. But the children inside, Val protested. Red, for all her 14 or 15 years, was unperturbed by his objection, turning her face and shoulders away from him. This was her battlefield. You are here by my leave. Don't presume to order me. These are lawless lands, and we deal with lawbreakers in our own way. The law is enforced when men choose to follow it. I am no man, she said, and neither is Quentin Stills. He's a worm. Red's fighters pulled up armfuls of grass from the meadow while others brought kindling from the forest. They made a great nest of firewood around the wagon, piling it as high as the wheels. You hear us outside, Quentin? We're going to roast you like the pig you are, Red cried out. A high-pitched voice warbled back. I have children in here with me. I'll slay them one by one. You are more likely to rape them, Quentin. But I won't give you time. I consider them lost already. I've saved enough out here for a day's work. You're mad! One of her fighters was striking a flint and chip next to the base of the grasses. He cupped his hand around a weak flame and blew on it to give it life. That is not news to anyone, Red mumbled as the tongues of fire spread among the grass and the kindling began to crackle. Dark curds of smoke wound about the wagon, and Quentin pressed his face up against the bars on the window. Red had been right. It was round, and with an upturned nose he looked nothing short of porcine. You can have them all, he said in a rushed voice. Just let me live! I've already told you they are dead to me. Just like you. The fire spread and the wood began to hiss. Haille could hear the children inside coughing. Even at a distance he could feel the heat on his face. The air around the wagon shimmered. He could only imagine what those within were feeling. Some of the boards were turning black and beginning to scale. More crows began to circle in the sky and the just-released children began to cry. Red looked at her nails. You'll kill them, Quentin said between coughs. The wheels were fully engulfed. Val rushed forward to Red's side. This is barbaric. Check yourself, old man, Red growled, her hand on her sword. 3 sets of bow and arrows were swiftly aimed at Val from Red's fighters. Red played with the string on her own bow, twanging it without rhythm to a melody only she could hear. Her fighters remained rooted in place, their arrows trained on the wagon, on Val, and even the children they had freed who were standing, their eyes pleading with their very own rescuers, turned executioners. The grease on the axles was burning with a bright yellow flame. The wagon began to rock and shake. Red drew an arrow casually from her quiver as the lock on the door clicked. Suddenly, the door burst open and a fleshy man in sateen robes spilled out. His face was red, his temples and hair blackened with soot. His eyes watered and he staggered as if drunk. Children poured out of the wagon after him, leaping over the flames. Quentin dragged a brunette girl, no older than 4, by the hair alongside him. She was wailing, her soft face covered in tears and soot. Quentin placed a bone-handled knife to her neck. "I'll kill her! Let me go or I'll kill her!" She was tiny next to him, her head barely as high as his belt buckle. Red drew back the string on her bow and closed one eye. "Quentin, you should have picked a taller child." She let the arrow fly and it embedded itself in the slaver's left eye socket. He let go of the girl and lifted his hand to his face. Red handed the bow to one of her fighters, walked through the grass, and drew her sword. Quentin stumbled to escape, his legs kicking and tangling in his own robes. He came close to brushing up against Haille, but Haille stepped out of his reach. Red came alongside him, yanked out the arrow in a spray of viscous fluid, causing Quentin to cry out again. The fire was roaring now, and Quentin was whimpering. Red took a fistful of his hair and growled in his ear. "This is what happens when you compete with me." Her first hack severed most of the soft flesh and tendons of his neck. She sawed through his spine with a few thrusts. The weight of the body stretched and snapped any sinews left. Red sneered at the head in her hands before dropping it to the ground with a thud. Caitlin vomited. Even Cody looked green. The corners of Val's mouth were turned downward in disgust. The fighters had put away their weapons and were gathering the children in 2 rows, older children paired with younger ones. "Let that be a lesson to you as new friends," Red said, the column of smoke eclipsing the sun and the fire casting her in a red glow. "Don't ever question my methods again."